That's not usually the way people live. I've just felt like even if I have a lot to gain by being insincere or being the way most people live, behave, speak, what other people expect, I would just have a harder time living with myself that way. And I would always prefer to be Steven, to be who I am. Any type of job or work where you're dealing with people, I think is always going to benefit more from being real to people and being personal with persons. Just like never being fake. I mean, it's so easy to be fake. It's so much more convenient to be fake and comfortable sometimes to be fake. But you're killing yourself. You're destroying who you are when you're fake because you're suppressing, and not just suppressing, but reversing who you are, who God made you to be.
Stephen Edelson, I am so happy to have you on Becoming You. You are one of my dearest, longest friends since orientation in college, over 10 years ago at this point. So thank you so much for being part of my journey in life and being part of this podcast.
Of course. Thank you, Katrina, for having me. It's an honor to help to be on the podcast with you, but it's even more of a joy to see you again and talk to you again. I know, it's, as life goes on and gets busier for everyone, you and me and all of our friends, it's a lot harder to keep in touch, but this is a great reason, a great excuse to be able to catch up.
I couldn't agree more. And I just love how off the grid you and I have both been in different capacities over the years. Even when we first met, I never even had a cell phone. And since then, I don't think you've really been on social media. So it just goes to show intentionality and building friendships with a purpose can really go such a long way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, we've always been able to, this is sort of a cliche, but it's true nonetheless, pick up where we left off. And no matter how much time goes by or how much distance, when we were able to get together again, it was like we were still in college. So you don't have that with everybody, but I know I always appreciated that in our friendship.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even this afternoon, you texted me right before we were hopping on, like, "Hey, can I sip a scotch while we do this chat?"
Thanks
And
again
that
for
is
saying
just
yes.
like, right, you to a T. It reminds me of, our college days, obviously dry campus, so no one get any crazy ideas, but we would just sit and have these deep conversations, you, me, and Julian, and that little plateau area, whatever it was called.
The
And
piazza.
yeah, the plaza, piazza.
Piazza is Italian for plateau area.
Oh, so I was right there. Thank you. Thank you for affirming that, Mr. Italian. And I just always loved your energy in college. Like, we've talked about this too, but so you and we spent like 4 years in undergrad together. I was studying psychology, you were studying philosophy, you studied abroad fall of sophomore year, and I studied abroad spring of sophomore year, but I was able to kind of overlap with you a little bit and see you in your element. And something that always stuck out about me is just how authentic you've been to yourself, how genuine you are as a person, and you've never really swayed to the norms, even within communities that love, and respect. And part of becoming you, and the premise of this podcast is to dive deep into people's experiences of how they evolve as human beings on this planet. So I would just love to hear your take on your time during college, your transition throughout life, whatever you want to talk about.
I remember, speaking of our semesters abroad, I remember when you came to visit during my semester, and I'm sure you remember this one when I had just gotten back from a trip to Milan,
Right.
and
Soccer game with
and you
Julian.
and no, well that was, I think that was a different trip with Julian wasn't in Milan, but I think
Oh,
I went
okay.
with Nathan Kane and Dave Harburg, but we went to a soccer game. But I remember when I got back, your friends were trying to surprise me that you were there and hide you from me,
Right.
and like so you would surprise me.
Right.
And I remember my reaction when I saw you. I remember I just like I lost it. I went nuts. I was so shocked and ecstatic to see you because I wasn't it was the last person I was expecting to see.
Right.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that
Oh,
outside the Cartauza?
100%. Yeah,
And I
because
remember I
I had
just
yeah. I had gotten to the Cartauza earlier in the day. It was like, light out, whatever. But you came back from the soccer game. It was like pitch black, and the girls were
yeah
hiding me, like you said. And it
yeah
was just an amazing, euphoric moment. I mean, there's nothing like
yeah
that. Surprising your friends, abroad. I mean, it's
yeah.
unheard of.
Yeah, it was just euphoric's a good word. It was just like the shock and joy of seeing someone I didn't expect to see, who I hadn't seen in so long, who I obviously missed a lot, and then seeing you there, it was such a cool moment of friendship. I think like
Yeah.
realizing this is like this is a really important person who I'm going to be this excited to see Katrina. It's like there must be something great about her. So everything you're saying about me, I could say about you too. But I know you want to interview me, so um,
Right. This is about you.
I'll speak a little bit. I know, I'll speak a little bit to your point. I won't start interviewing you during on your
All
podcast.
good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Thank you again for saying that. And I just one more thing about the, you and our friendship. I think one of the reasons that we became that we were such good friends, in college and have remained, friends after college is because I think I see those same qualities in you, and I think we recognize and appreciate them in each other. Um, and to your point, it's not always uh, that's not usually the way people live. And I don't in regards to myself, I don't mean it in a way to elevate myself over anyone, because I think there are a lot of people who live more of a conformed, expected lifestyle and are better people than me. But I do think that it is better to you know to be true to yourself, regardless of the consequences, and to seek sincerity over conformity, in all situations, and to live in a way that is um, natural and consistent with who you are, who Stephen is, who Katrina is. We're not just a human being or a man or a woman. We're an individual, incommunicable, unprecedented, unrepeatable person who no one else is and no one else can be. And who that person is someone worth living out. Um, so I think I've just felt like even if I have a lot to gain by being insincere, or being more conformist, or going along with the way most people um, uh, live, behave, speak, what other people expect, which isn't always a bad thing. It's not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
Right.
But either way, I think I I think I just would have a harder time living with myself that way, and I would always just prefer to be Steven, to be who I am, um, even if there's some inconveniences and discomfort that arises as a result, rather than have a smoother, more comfortable, convenient life by being something even a little different from who I am. So I think that's kind of what I've tried to live out. And I think even in my job, like I'm a teacher. I was an admissions director for a couple years before going into full time teaching, or going back into it. Now I have a role with student life in the high school. But even in, like, I'll take admissions, for example. Admissions is there's a lot of salesmanship and advertising that's part of that, and trying to sell a product to families and students. Even in those situations, I always felt like uh, as an admissions director, as a teacher, as an administrator, um, whoever I'm dealing with is going to have more respect for me and be uh, more heavily influenced by me in the right way if I'm not just saying what um, I'm supposed to say, but saying what I really believe and think and feel. And if that happens to be having a conversation about restaurants or movies or travel or sports instead of about the curriculum of the school, uh, then that's fine, because at the end of the day, especially education, but I think pretty much all, even business, I think takes this on, but especially something like education, or any I shouldn't say just it's not just education, any type of work where you're dealing with people,
Right.
as opposed to just numbers. Any
Right.
type of job or work where you're dealing with people, I think is always going to benefit more from um, being real to people, and
Mhm.
and being personal with persons, because these are people, like they should respond to a real person, not to a cookie cutter, edited, scripted version of what someone expects someone to say in that situation.
Spot on. I could just listen to you forever, I swear. To me, like the way your mind works, the pathways that you kind of connect makes so much sense. And it really does speak to your authenticity as a human, knowing yourself well enough to allow those around you to be themselves too, and being present enough to realize that focusing on things like sports or common connections can take precedence over the business of the day, whatever that looks like, whether it's school curriculum or meetings or what have you. There's something about connecting with a person in real time that matters so much. We never know how many moments in life we'll have with a person, whether it's one that's fleeting or it's your family that have been there forever and you think, oh, we'll be around for 20 more years. But I heard this said perfectly, but 20 years could mean just 20 more Christmases. It doesn't necessarily mean, 365 days times 20. So being really intentional with the time that you have with a person, respecting their time, being grateful for the mutual exchange of time and connection. And then even when you're saying goodbye to that person or thanking them or whatever the case is, that may be your last opportunity. So being really mindful of that in those moments, I think goes such a long way. And you don't really seem to rush that process. Sorry, let me re-say that. You don't really seem to rush that process, which makes the person in front of you feel so special, and it just makes your energy come across so genuinely.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I mean, rushing it would make it less natural, more forced, more contrived, more of an agenda. And yeah, I mean, there's certain things that require that type of response. Like, I guess, like writing a paper, or um, like building a deck, but uh, those aren't human beings that you're dealing with. So yeah, I think not having an agenda, just seeking to know and love other people,
Hmm.
and uh, build a bond, a connection with them. You know, I think that's always going to be more fulfilling to both you and the other person than any type of transactional um, uh, approach. Um, what was I going to say? And like uh, in education, which is where the most. I mean, I've been in education for 10 years, so that's where my work experience is. Um, but when I was at Salesian High School, one of St. Don Bosco's mottos was, "Education is a matter of the heart." It's not just about the mind; it's about the heart too. And another thing he said is, it's not enough that you love your students, but they have to know that you're loved. So that idea of connection, like not just doing the right thing, but of doing the right thing, and to use your word, with intention, with an intentional response where you're you're trying to develop a relationship, because even though student teacher is a professional relationship, it's still a relationship. Relationship is still the right word. It's not like you know being a not to downplay any other careers, but it's not like working in mergers and acquisitions where you're trying to figure out the best business deal for two companies to get together, which I guess someone could take a personal approach to. Also, I wouldn't know how to do that, but when you're talking about even students and teachers, even though it's professional,
Hmm.
not necessarily platonic, it's still a relationship. There's still love and
Hmm.
um, intimacy that's proper to caring for any other human being, even if it's a dean and the students, or an administrator and students. Like, I find education is always more fruitful and fulfilling when it's seeking relationship, not just rules, but relationship. my,
Right.
my former my former boss at the school I'm at now, he used to say, one of his mottos was, the mortar matters. The mortar, and the mortar is in between the bricks. So if the bricks are the
Right.
rules,
Okay.
the mortar is what holds them together, and that matters more than the bricks. They both matter. You need both bricks and mortar to build a house. You can't have just one. You need both.
Right.
But um, the mortar is what holds the bricks together. So the bricks are the rules, the mortar is the relationship,
Hmm.
and the relationship is really the purpose. It's not that the relationship it's not that the rules are the purpose of the relationship. It's the other way around. The rules, the relationship is the purpose of the rules.
Right. And that just reminds me of that phrase, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, and
Hmm.
just leaning
Hmm.
into, what was the intention behind this? How has it transformed over time? And maybe don't be so black and white in your thinking, and I think that's an opportunity for all of us to kind of show more compassion, be more humane, see things through more of a gray lens rather than this black and white rigid thinking. But I
Hmm.
love that analogy with the mortar and the brick. And it reminds me too of like our corpus callosum and connective tissue, and just the fact that like even in our brain, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, they operate independently, but there's still connective tissue to make sure that they're communicating and working together. And so
Hmm.
that just extends outside the body when we're thinking about how do we connect and communicate with those around us.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and then just to clarify, uh, it's I think you can go too far in one direction or the other. Like, spirit and letter is a great analogy for this principle. But just as wrong as it would be to ignore the spirit for the sake of the letter, I think there's also a mistake in ignoring the letter for the sake of the spirit. And going back to the analogy of the house, if you just have mortar, you're not building a house. If you just have bricks,
Right.
you're not building a house. You do need
Yeah, you
both
might
of
have
them,
like a
so they
little
complement.
mound.
Yeah, exactly, an anthill. Um, but so you need both of them, but you don't want to stray too far in one direction or the other. But it's and that's and looking at the human nature. We have a mind and a heart. We're not just thinking robots, but we're also not just feeling balls of goo. We have emotions, we have reason, we have both for a
Mhm.
reason. And that's the fullness of human nature. It's not just about feelings or emotion. It's not just about logic and reason. It's about integrating both of them together in a complete humanity.
Right. So let me ask you too, because the last time I saw you, obviously I went to your wedding with you and your wife, saw you guys get married, which was awesome. And then the two of you with your firstborn, Peter, I think he was only a few months old, you all came to my
Yeah.
housewarming in Jersey City, but this was January 2020. So we all know what happened after that. And I
Yeah.
don't think I've seen you in person ever since. And now you have three kids. So I can only imagine what a whirlwind that's been for you. And even in your evolution as a person on this planet, and the way maybe you're already thinking about how do I pass on the wisdom that I've learned to my kids now? What has that experience been like for you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've just, I have a crazy memory. I don't know if you remember that about me, Katrina, like with dates and everything, but I remember the date of that, when you met Peter. It was January 11th,
It sure
2020.
was. Yep.
So right before the pandemic, and I remember because there were two things on that day that were important. It was your party, which was we were going to, and I hadn't seen you in a long time, so I was excited to come over with Anya and Peter. Um, but also my former boss, Colonel Dave Petrillo, who I mentioned before, who coined that phrase, "The mortar matters." It was his going away party. He had retired from the school 6 months earlier,
Wow.
and this was his. And the same day, right after your party, he went to his going away party. So it's funny how those two things
That is
are
so
actually coming
funny.
together
And
a
we
little
did
bit now.
not even plan to talk about that in that way.
I
That's
know, I know,
amazing.
I know. But yeah, so right before COVID, you're right. So then yeah, Peter was October, November, December, January. He was 4 months old exactly when you met him. So he was an infant still.
Yeah.
And now I have three children. My third is older than Peter was
Oh my
when you first met him. My third is 13 months. So I have
wow.
Peter, my son, and then I have two girls. I have Amelia, who's 2.5,
Mhm.
and then Kiara, who's 13 months. Um,
Wow.
and
Beautiful. Well,
yeah, so
congratulations. That's amazing.
yeah, it is. Thank you. It is definitely a lot. I think you would get along well with Amelia, my middle child, my daughter, because she has that same like spitfire, like like firecracker. I just used the word fire twice. I guess you're a pretty fiery person.
Feisty
Spitfire,
personality.
firecracker, feisty personality. So I think
I
you
love
guys would
it.
hit it off. And
I
she's a very
can't wait to
independent
meet
woman,
her.
just like you. Yeah, she's got the independent woman character too, um,
Good.
that you have. So like yesterday we took them to the Museum of Natural History in New York City, and Amelia, she's 2.5. She wanted to wear a different coat. My wife put a more fashionable coat on her for pictures, but she wanted to wear her normal coat, which I guess is more comfortable,
Right.
and just would not get in the stroller, would not let us hold her, would not walk with us. So we decided maybe we'll just start walking. We were on like 87th Street, where we used to live for a year, first year of marriage. 87th Street in Central Park West, and we start walking. We think she's gonna follow us. Like, no, don't leave. Instead, she just throws herself on the floor on the middle of the street in New York City. Just throws herself on the floor and just is screaming. So
Jeez.
that's like an average day. That's an average day.
Right.
And my son, like he's um, well, just to summarize, like even my son who's 4, even Peter who's 4 now, I mean, he still throws temper tantrums. I think most 4-year-olds are still prone to temper tantrums. Maybe when he gets 5 or 6, he'll stop. But pretty much, Kiara is too young to throw a temper tantrum, but she has other problems because she's only 1, but she's already walking like 90 miles an hour. So you have this little tiny thing that's like scooting all across the house. Anywhere there's food, she gets that from me. Anywhere there's food, she takes
I
off
love that.
and goes for it. She's like a hunter and not a hunter and gatherer, just a hunter and eater. Um,
Right.
so basically, it's three small kids with their own um, difficulties that are not the same.
Mm.
So it's not like having triplets, which I'm sure is even harder, but at least triplets, like they all need the same thing, right? They're all on the same stage and place. Uh, Whereas with a 4-year-old, 2.5-year-old, and a 1-year-old, there are three different stages that need three different things, and
Right.
they're all difficult. They're all
Right.
difficult. They're all walking. They're all like very needy. They're all aware of everything going on. So I think and Anya's with them more than me. She's working now, but she's a nurse, so she works only 3 days a week. So she's with them more than me, and so all the frustration and stress I experience, she experiences times 2 or 3 at least. But
Mhm.
for both of us, it is challenging. It's a daily challenge to be patient, to be kind uh, with them because they're you have like three people who it's not their fault, it's just their age. They only think of themselves. Like think
Right.
about like how difficult it is when you have a friend who's really egotistical and selfish, only thinks about themselves. Imagine having like three who it's like 10 times that 24/7. So
Right. Right.
I'm not going to go. I'll just say that's where we are now, and it's harder now than it's ever been
Mhm.
because one child is uh, much easier than two. Two
Mhm.
children are much easier than three. and especially having three under 4.5, it's just a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna go like month by month. Don't worry, but I'll just because you mentioned COVID, I'll just go quickly through it. Thank God, COVID, didn't uh, attack us that badly. We didn't have any tragedies, thank God, in our family from that. We all got COVID, but it was, I think most people did. We didn't. Uh, Anya and I were really sick for like 3 days, and then that was it. So thank God it wasn't anything more serious than that. The kids got it; they didn't even have any symptoms. But we were living in Fort Lee. I think you knew that, Fort Lee, for 3 years.
Yes.
That was during COVID also. Anya worked, through it at Columbia as a nurse, but she's in the she's in the NICU with the infants, so she didn't really come across the virus in her division. But we were in Fort Lee for 3 years. That's where Peter and Amelia were. Oh no, actually, so Peter was born in the city in the Upper West Side, and then Amelia was born in Fort Lee, and Kiara was born. So now we live in Tuckahoe, New York. I don't know if you know where
Oh, I
Tuckahoe is.
love
It's like
Tuckahoe. Yeah.
you know where that is. That's where we live now.
Yeah.
That's where I am right now. So Kiara was born here. Um, and yeah, I mean, we've gone on some trips. We've gone to we went to Poland this past summer.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um,
You got to see
we went
Anya's
to the
family?
yeah, her grandmother and her aunt still live there, so
Oh,
we saw them.
yeah.
We were there for 2 weeks. It was a great trip. Um, we went we went to Miami, Fort Lauderdale a couple times with one of the kids. We took like Peter when he was a baby, then Kiara when she was a baby. Um, we went to the Bahamas right before Peter was born. So we've been able to travel a little bit, but I feel like it's like so much of your life becomes like just being with the kids and taking care of them. And I don't mean to make it sound miserable. I'm not miserable. I'm tired and I'm um, uh, stressed out, but not miserable. And I think Anya would say the same thing. It's a lot of work, and it takes up a lot of time and energy and attention, and it takes away almost all of your freedom and relaxation and leisure. But if you can imagine all of that, for lack of a less intense word, suffering and sacrifice and pain being worth it completely. That's what it is like to have children. It's like you would never expect all that difficulty and
Right.
and trouble to be worth it. In any other situation, it would never be worth it. But in this
Yeah.
case, somehow it is. It is, and
Yeah.
it's not.
So
It's worth it.
that
I think.
is like the perfect way to sum that up. Wait. Okay, yeah. So that okay, hold on. So what you were describing earlier, how they all have different personalities, and you're basically saying this is a puddle of challenges that you wouldn't choose in any other situation, but with the kids, it's worth it because they're your own children. What I find interesting, I'm, single, no kids, you were able to choose yourself in the sense like we all have autonomy over ourselves. We can kind of develop and grow in different ways that are meaningful to us. So if we don't like our behavior in a certain area, we can kind of work on it to control it, tweak it, whatever the case is. And then you can obviously choose your partner as well. So you and Anya were able to choose each other. Now, the two of you had three kids where you don't get to choose their personalities, their genders, their anything, their difficulties, as you said. So I don't know if you've even had a minute to reflect through your thought process here, but has there been any thought around that situation? Has it been a mindful, like conscious challenge for you, or is it just something that you push through and don't think about?
Katrina, you paused just like for 10 seconds right after you said Anya and I were able to choose each other. Do you remember like what you said right after that?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, you can't choose your own kids. You can't choose their
Yeah.
personality or their difficulties or anything like that.
Okay. So and the question after that was
So I know you mentioned that you basically appreciate the challenges that you find within your children, but these aren't challenges that you would have chosen with like friends. Like if your friends are giving you such a hard time,
yeah,
like you
yeah,
would probably drop them.
yeah,
But with your
yeah.
kids, like you obviously put up with it. But what is that like as a human being to go through those types of obstacles where you don't really have control over who your kids are or how they show up in the world, but obviously as a parent you have different obligation towards them.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, well, I think there's two things that come to my mind. First of all, on a practical level and on a parental level, um, I think part of my job, part of our job, Anya and I, is to make them more likable as people. In other words, like, yeah, like you said, like, we're even though we get very frustrated, we're always going to want to be with them and want to be in their lives and love them no matter what because we're their parents. But that doesn't go for other people in their life.
Right.
So we want them to have friends. We want them to um, not be popular, but to be liked by other people. We want them to have great relationships, like we were saying before. We want them to be happy, which I mean I think we all agree requires loving relationships in your life. So part of our job is to teach them how to be, and likable is probably not the right word. Teach them how to be a good person who others people will naturally want to come to know and love. So that like when they do something that's wrong, that's obnoxious, we correct it and discipline it and teach them why it's wrong and why they shouldn't do it. And of course, that doesn't usually work, but I feel like if we keep doing it enough,
Yeah.
it'll eventually sink in as
Yeah.
they get a little older.
I was
So
gonna
part
say,
of part of it is practical. It's like listen, if when you're acting like someone who no, like we don't want to be around, you need to stop
right,
and be better and change and just do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. And of course, that's 10 times easier said than done with anyone, especially a 4-year old or a 2-year old. But I think
right,
that's part of it too, is just like, correcting instead of just like, because it's so much easier not to discipline. It's so much easier just to let them do whatever they want and ignore it. It's so much easier. And of course, I think every parent falls into that from time to time. But I think the more often you can respond um, to mistakes and wrongdoing with decisive correction and teaching and discipline, I think the better your child will be in the long run. Because, like I said, I do think eventually that sinks in. So part of it is just teaching them, not to be the type of person that nobody wants to be around, and to be the type of person that others are going to be drawn to and moved to.
mhm,
Um, which going back to our original point, I think ultimately is who they truly are, who God created them to be, and um, we we have to figure out who they are and how to help them be that person. But really, in the end, that's going to be up to them to do. We can't do that for them. Ultimately, we can guide them in that direction.
mhm.
Um, but it's not just about like having these great qualities, but it's about you know going back to our original conversation, like being like truly Peter, truly Amelia, truly Kiara, who all of us are still figuring out who they are because they're not fully developed yet, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually. Um, and then the other side of it is, uh, and I don't think this is contrary to that first point. I think there are two sides of the same coin. Is simultaneously, um, accepting their flawed and even wounded nature, accepting not necessarily their imperfections, but accepting them as an imperfect person. You see the difference there?
Yeah.
So we can strive. We should always strive to improve upon our imperfections, but we will always be an imperfect person. We'll always be a human being. We'll always be wounded in some way. That's part of being human. That's part of the reality of sin and vice and evil that is part of life. Not that we're evil, but we make bad choices. We do the wrong thing. We have weaknesses, wounds, vices that hinder us from perfection. That's part of being human. So I think not accepting their imperfections, but in accepting them as an imperfect person and not expecting them to be perfect, because that's not reality. That's not going to happen. So, seeing, okay, Peter struggles with this, Amelia struggles with this. Okay, we can work on that. We can try and help them grow in that and improve upon that, but they're never going to be perfect and they're always going to be wounded. And we in some way, uh, and we have to be patient with them and accept them as an imperfect person, because Anya and I are imperfect parents, and we're always going to be, no matter how hard we try. We're never going to be a perfect mom and dad. And part of the tragedy of being a parent and a spouse, for that matter, is knowing that your imperfections, your wounds, um, affect your children and make and wound them.
Hmm.
Wound them. I know that my children have wounds because of me, and I'm not an abusive father. I'm not at all. But I know that I'm a very flawed father, as I think every father is, except God the Father. And in my flaws, I wound my children unintentionally,
Hmm.
and that's tragic. As a parent, that's a tragic realization. But
Right.
um, I think it should add to my compassion. Used that word before. I love that word. Literally means to suffer with. You probably knew that. It's not just sympathy is a little different.
Right.
Sympathy is good too, but it's not as strong. It's not as personal. It's not
Hmm.
as intimate. It's not as vulnerable as compassion. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Compassion, from the Latin root, is literally to suffer with them. To
Hmm.
suffer with them. And I think that's a very important part of marriage, of family, of parenting, is knowing that, okay, a lot of the wounds that my spouse or my children have is because of me. And so I owe it to them to suffer with them through this, and not just to try and fix them, but to try and be there in the midst of their own struggle
Hmm.
and pain.
Right.
Um, so that was a great word you used before. I probably wouldn't have thought to use it now if you didn't use it earlier.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I'm
and I
glad.
remember, have you ever seen, just to go off topic for 1 minute? Have you
Yeah.
ever seen? I'm sure you've seen the. I guess it's a blog or a Facebook page. It's called Humans of New York. Have you ever seen that?
Yes. Yes. I love
Isn't it?
that.
Isn't it great?
Yeah. I think
And I
Brandon
haven't
is
looked.
his name who takes those photos and
Yeah,
interviews those people. Yeah.
yeah. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I went through a, not a stage, but like I remember there was a time in my life where I was looking at it every day for months, and I was always like moved to tears, inspired by some of the things I would read. And I'm not going to go into it too much, but just to give an example of, like, I think sincere compassion is that I remember there was a dad whose son had cancer. I think his son was dying of cancer. And
Hmm.
the dad said, um, uh, something, I'm paraphrasing completely, don't quote me, but something along the lines of, of course I want him to be cured, of course, but I also want to feel what he's feeling. Like, I also wish I could experience this pain that he's going through, so I
Hmm.
could understand, um,
Wow.
his suffering.
Hmm.
I'm paraphrasing, but it was along those lines, and
Yeah.
I was that was before I was a father. It was long before I was a
Very
parent,
powerful. And obviously it
and I
stuck
was
with you.
yeah, and I was just this was like probably 10 years ago I read this, 8 years ago maybe. And
Yeah.
it's always stuck with me, because I just like, that's compassion. That's real compassion.
Yeah.
Is loving someone so much that whatever they're going through, no matter how terrible it is, you want to understand it. You want to not just understand it, you want to feel it so you
Mhm.
can understand it, and so
Mhm.
you can understand them for the sake of properly loving them in their suffering.
Right. That's so
So they're
beautiful.
not so they're not going through it alone.
Yeah. And it's such a unique way of looking at how to help people through their situations. For anyone that's familiar with that butterfly analogy, if a butterfly, starts off as a caterpillar, goes into the chrysalis, if you try to break open the chrysalis prematurely, that butterfly will never actually be able to fly because the wings didn't have a chance to grow strong enough to break itself out of its own
Yeah.
chrysalis and then fly. And a lot of times we see people struggling and we want to save them, we want to rescue them, help them, fix it. We don't want to give them the chance to work through it themselves because we think we have the answers. And it also causes us a level of distress to see someone else in pain, in suffering, doing something wrong, doing something too slowly, like whatever the case is, that that drives that urge to, go and rescue that person and jump in and there's a plane and interfere with their own progress and progression of growing, learning, evolving for themselves. And Stephen, you having 3 kids now, I can only imagine just the natural inclination that this is now an extension of you. Each of these new humans are an extension of you. They're your responsibility, obviously, but also they now reflect on you too. So their behaviors, their actions, words, whatever, are possibly another avenue of you feeling like, wow, this is about me and I need to manage expectations, or I need to manage these little humans because I don't want anyone else thinking poorly about me. And I don't know how much of this plays into your actual conscious thought or not, because the way you've described raising your kids is very intentional, but it's also detached in the sense that
Yeah.
you already know you need to let your kids be themselves and find themselves and work through their own process. But again, as humans, I think our ego kind of can get in the way sometimes, and we think, oh, but even though that's true, I still want you to do it my way because my way is the best way, and this is the way I know, and it's how I'm most comfortable. So, how do you work through that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's another great question. Um, yeah. I honestly don't think about my kids that way. Um, I'm I'm in awe of the fact that they are um, an extension of me, like even just biologically. Like when I look at them and I think about that connection, like what it means to be a biological parent and child.
Right.
Um, like to to have cooperated in their creation and brought them into existence, and to have like to share DNA and just what it means to be like a parent, and have a child like that I'm in awe of that. I'm enamored by that reality, but I never feel like what they do is a reflection of me. um I guess there is some sense in which that's true, in terms of I think the way that we raise them um, is so important, and hopefully they will live a great life because they've been raised well. So I think about that,
Mhm.
but I like I know this isn't what you're referring to or alluding to, but the idea of like parents who live vicariously through their children, which is I think obviously pretty flawed approach. I thank God I've never felt that temptation, like where their success is my success, their failure is my failure. I've never felt that. I think I've just seen enough like bad examples of that, in life to know that that's not the right idea. And my pride in them, like it comes from who they are, not because like they're my it's not because like what they're doing is making me look better or worse. It's just like I want them to be happy. I want what's best for them, not for my sake but just for their sake. And and if something if I would rather have something great happen to them than something great happen to me. And I'd rather have something bad happen to me than something bad happen to them. So I don't like associate myself with them to that extent in terms of failures and successes. Like I remember the NFL former NFL player Howie Long. I forget the details of this, but his son was about to break one of his records, like high school or college football records, and they interviewed him about it, and he was saying that like he was rooting for his son to beat his record, and he was so proud and happy that his son was going to beat his record and become better than him in this regard. And there's a
Wow.
lot of like messed up dads out there who would feel the opposite, like they always
Right.
want to be better than their son, or
Right.
or or, or they want like they like their success is
Mhm.
only their son's success is only in relation to them. And I just I don't think any good dad would feel that way. They would always want their son, like Howie Long did. They always want their son to do better than them, and
Right.
and be better
Did
than
you
them.
ever
So
watch One Tree Hill?
no, I didn't, but I know the show. I mean, I'm
Okay.
familiar with it.
So there's a dad in
I
that
haven't really
show.
watched.
Yeah, Dan Scott, and he literally was just competing with high school boys, aka his two sons, and trying to like suppress their success to preserve his former success when he was in high school. So it's just very interesting to kind of have that parallel comparison.
Yeah, and there's a freedom in I think the approach of uh, detachment too, because um, it's just anytime you have a chance to, even though even though my freedom now is much more limited, like there's so many other areas of my life where I'm able to find freedom in surrendering my freedom. So for instance, just not, and of course I want to be the best person I can be as well, but being able to stop caring and thinking about myself, and and putting my focus and attention on other people and on their success and their happiness and what's best for them, instead of just my own personal gain. Like there's an inexplicable freedom in that. And just like, you again, another good word, the detachment, like just not not making it about your accomplishments, or your situation, but about about other people, about the people who you love, and just caring about their success and their happiness. There's a freedom in that detachment, um, because you can accept, difficulty for yourself, as long as you know that your children and your wife are happy, and living a life of goodness and virtue and love and holiness and fulfillment, um, and becoming, to the point of your podcast, becoming who they are, becoming who God created them to be. And I think whenever I teach my children something, and I tell them this, I don't know if they're old enough to understand it. Maybe Peter is. I tell them, it's like, listen, I'm not, correcting you or disciplining you because I'm trying to be mean, or because I don't want you to get what you want. It's because I want you to have a great life where you're happy, and you need to learn these lessons in order to do that. Like, you can't just do whatever you want. Doing whatever you want doesn't make people happy. It's living, it's living a good life. It's being a good person. It's being true to who you are, like you pointed out before, and it's living for other people. I mean, if there's any happiness in my life now, it's because um, most of my life is aimed at, and I fail at this consistently, Katrina. I fail at this every day, but the vast majority of my life is at least aimed at, has the intention of living for other people who are
Mhm,
not me. And
mhm.
that's where any happiness I experience comes from. And I want the same for my children, but um, they I know that there's a path towards that and a path away from that, and I'm trying to guide them on the path towards that.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I almost feel like that's a perfect way to wrap up the episode too. But is there anything else that's top of mind when you think about your becoming journey, or anything that you would maybe want the audience to hear, um, in any direction, either future focused or present focused?
Um, Good questions. Give me a second to think about that.
Sure.
Well, I would say one thing that would apply to anybody, like not just in my situation, but to anyone. And I guess I alluded to this earlier, sort of, but I think, of regardless of the consequences, to always try and be um, honest and truthful. And that doesn't mean like saying mean things because they're true.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. I mean, just like never being fake. I mean, it's so easy to be fake. It's so much more convenient to be fake and comfortable sometimes to be fake. But you're really, like, you're killing yourself. You're destroying who you are when you're fake, because you're suppressing, and not just suppressing, but sort of, like reversing who you're supposed to, who you are, who God made you to be. Which is not just like a random, like uh, being that developed by chance. It's someone who was created in intentionally, with a purpose. And that, because of that, who each of us is something great and something beautiful. And I think the more honest and truthful we can be, and other psychologists and philosophers have made these types of points. I know, Jordan Peterson talks about this a little bit, but the more honest and truthful we can be, I think in all situations, the more ourselves we will become. Um, the less fake we will be. That it's the opposite of being insincere, the opposite of being dishonest. I think that's really important in growing as a person and in becoming you. I think that's a really important thing, and that can always be done with charity. I don't think there's ever a situation where the truth and charity exclude each other. I think it takes prudence and wisdom to understand how to integrate them properly. But I think you can always be loving while being truthful. I don't think you have to choose ever. I don't.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, I think that the opposite is true. I think that if you're not truthful, if you're not honest, your love is also fake.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's not really possible to be loving without being truthful. It is possible to be truthful without being loving, but then the truth is not fruitful for people. It's not effective. It falls on deaf ears. So I think that's a really important practical point that I've learned. And again, something that I fail at very often, but at least I do know what I'm
Right.
supposed to do, and I
Yeah.
try to do it. And sometimes I succeed once in a while.
Yeah.
So I think that's a practical point too. And then in terms of my situation as a husband and father, I mentioned I'm also a teacher and administrator. Um, I know there's a lot of emphasis in America on career progress, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being successful in your career. I think that's important. I think it's very relevant, related to family life. However, there are some situations where I think you have to choose between the two, or it may be as simple as disappointing a boss or leaving a job for the sake of the family. I think that I know that that's a very frightening thing to do, but I think and I actually had a conversation. I'm sure you remember Mike Bianco, one of our mutual friends from
Yes.
college. I had a conversation with him about this not too long ago, and I think as husbands and wives, as mothers and fathers, we have to be ready to pull the trigger on any career that is making us a worse parent or a worse husband or wife. There's no career that's worth being a worse mother, a worse father, a worse husband, or a worse wife. There's no career that's worth that. No amount of money that's worth that. Now, of course, you have to provide for your family, but other than that, and I'm not saying poverty is a virtue or wealth is a vice. No, it's not true. But I'll just repeat: there's not a career or a promotion or a salary that is worth being a bad mother, a bad father, a bad husband, a bad wife. I think unfortunately in America that happens a lot. That
Mhm.
happens a lot, and we've all seen that happen. And it's always a mistake. I think it's always something people regret at the end of their life. I've heard this from like doctors and nurses who've been there at deathbeds. I've heard them say this. This is one of the things that people regret is they work too many hours. They spend too much time on their career. They didn't work hard enough on the relationships with other people in their life, especially their family, especially their children. They didn't work hard enough in those relationships. They worked harder at their job, and now on their deathbed, that's their number one regret. So I think that's something young people our age, um, who either are have a family or who may have a family in the near future, need to understand is that uh, at the end of the day, in the end of life, like our relationships with other people, especially our family, that's what's going to matter more than any career or salary or position or promotion. And that goes for friendships too.
Yeah.
To a slightly lesser extent, that goes for friendships also.
Mhm. And I would say even your relationship with yourself, if a group of friends, like you said, or an employer or a job is keeping you from being your best self, then that's not healthy for you either. And if you're not able to mentally overcome it and stay positive and practice self-care outside of work or outside of those friendships or relationships, if for whatever reason they need to stay in place, if you're not able to overcome it, then you should find, an exit strategy and make moves to put yourself in a better situation. Because if you aren't your best self, you're not helping anyone, and you're certainly not doing yourself a favor in that
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah. I think that's a great point as well, Katrina.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen. Thanks for being on the show. You are such a great friend of mine. I cannot wait to see you and the three little bundles of joy and Anya again. It'll be uh, not too soon, whenever it happens.
I hope not, because
Can't come soon enough.
I hope not because it's been way too long.
I agree. But this is amazing. I know everyone will get a lot out of it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katrina, for choosing me to be on the podcast. It was a privilege, but also I really enjoyed speaking with you again after so long.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. You are my most important listener, and I can't thank you enough for spending your time with me. If this content resonates with you, then hit subscribe. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube by following @ConnectorQueen. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you again on the next episode of Becoming You.